very grateful for the team at Eventcombo for prioritizing this topic and making it come alive for you today. So I do have some slides I want to go through. I want to share a bit of my experience, and this is going to be as interactive as I can make it with a large group. So please use the chat. I'm going to be asking some questions throughout, and if you have any questions, just put them in the chat throughout. I will do my very best to show you the slides, watch the chat. Ideally, I would love for this to feel a little bit like a conversation. One thing I will note is when I'm sharing my slides, I'm not able to see myself. And so I will just ask you to bear with me. I'm going to do my best to make sure that I'm doing this professionally. But here we go. I'm going to go into the slides and we'll get going. All right. So what I wanted to start with just is to tell you a little bit about my story and why this topic is so important to me and what motivates me to be here today, sharing with you all about mental health, which is sometimes a vulnerable thing to talk about. You'll see in the first picture there, that is me at age 12 or 13. If it's not abundantly clear from the trophies around me, I was very academically motivated and very achievement driven. And maybe some of you can relate to that as well, around wanting to succeed and have that reflected in external success, whether it's awards, promotions, things like that. So that was very much my path, and it came relatively easily to me. And so I kept pushing through. I went off to university. Ultimately, I would get 3 degrees, but it was around the time of my second degree, which is the picture there. The tools that I was using, which was really just powering through and chasing success, no longer were serving me. And I started to burn out. I found I wasn't coping, and ultimately I crashed and burned. In 2008, I spent about 20 days in the hospital, and I lost a year where I took a full year off of all work and school because I was so burnt out and hadn't been attending to my mental health. I had been just chasing that external success without learning effective coping strategy. And it was in my recovery that I started to learn things that I'm going to share a few of them with you today, but things to really serve my mental health so that I could sustain the world and things that I had created, make sure that I could be successful at work day after day and not just sprinting. So I worked on that, worked on building up those tools. And ultimately, my career path brought me to Amazon, which is the final picture there. And Amazon has a really amazing emotional intelligence community. And it was so cool to me to discover that, because the strategies and tools that they taught at Amazon to teach leaders about what it means to be emotionally intelligent was the same stuff that I had learned coming out of the hospital, struggling with my mental health. It was the same exercises and the same vocabulary. And I really started to connect the dots that a big part of being an empathetic leader, an emotionally intelligent person at work, is about preserving your well-being. I became an EQ speaker, and I teach leadership teams around the world about what it means to be emotionally intelligent and really build those skills that are so critical for your long-term success. So that's why I'm here today. Hopefully help you manage a bit of your stress. I know stress is a part of all of our lives, but really make sure that you are doing everything you can to bolster yourself and get through that. So that's a bit about me, but really I want to emphasize that my story is not that unique. And I see already in the comments, that some of you, this is resonating with you, that this maybe strikes a familiar chord. This is what some of the stats say. And if you Google, sometimes depending on your source, the stats show even more prevalence. That 1 in 5, some stats say 1 in 4 people in any given year experience mental illness. There's a Deloitte study that says over 3/4 of people have experienced burnout at some point in the job that they're working at right now. A Forbes study said that 41% report that they're experiencing a lot of stress. So like on a 5-point scale, it's the most. They're experiencing a lot of stress. And in terms of the cost of this to business, like why should we as professionals or as business leaders, why care? There's a cost, a very real cost associated with the lost productivity of $1 trillion per year. And that's from World Health Organization. So if mental health, mental illness, if this hasn't been something in your lived experience, for sure, the people around you, this is something that they are managing and dealing with. And so this is stuff that is helpful to learn both for yourself, but also for colleagues, for people you may be managing. And for me, it's become a big part of, how I support my children, friends, family. This is a part of life. I see Ethan has written stress is part of life now. It's true. So this is focused on work life, but I think you can apply these strategies everywhere. So I created this Mentimeter to get it will create a word cloud. This is a code. You can go to menti.com or put in the QR code, but it will only accept the first 50 people. So I hear that there's a couple hundred of you who have joined for this. Thank you for giving your time and energy. So what I would ask is I'd like you to think about this question and maybe put it in the chat. If you can't get into menti.com and put in that code, if you can't get in, I'd love for you to share your thoughts in the chat here, if not in the Mentimeter. But I'd love to hear from you all. What is it that motivated you to come here? Why do you think it would be important to you to balance the chaos? And I want you to think about what would balance look like, what would it feel like if you achieved that? I don't usually say work-life balance, I say work-life harmony. So please, in the event chat here, if you could type some of the words that come to your mind when you think about managing that chaos, achieving balance, how would you feel? What would good look like to you? I would love to hear your thoughts. And I will pause talking so you have a minute to think and put stuff in the chat. I'm gonna go look at the Mentimeter too and see if there's any responses there. And there's no wrong answers either. Everyone's experience is so unique. So what does balance mean to you? I see a response in the Menti of peace, which is a great word, to achieve peace. What else do you think of? Why do you want to balance the chaos? What would you achieve? Come looking for solutions or maybe just quick steps. Yeah, quick steps to manage my stressful life. Balance has been something I haven't been able to achieve so far. Thank you, Sophie, for saying that. I will say, I am no guru or expert on balance either. I think this is an ongoing thing that we all struggle with, deal with, try and achieve it. And I think it's perpetually like this, where it's never a perfect balance. I don't think anyone wakes up one day and done it, it's balanced, but it is trying to work towards a more stable with less ups and downs. Just looking for some quick tips. Anything else that you think about around why is this important? What would it mean to you? Any other ideas? Yeah, I will do my best, Sophie, to share what I learned along the way. People taught me some things, and if I can share that, that's wonderful. All right, let's move forward. I want you to keep this in your mind as we go forward, thinking about what might you work towards, because at the end we're going to come back to this and start thinking about some small steps and goals that we could all make for ourselves. In terms of what I'm here and what my goals are and what I'm sharing, these are the things I'm thinking about. I want to talk about how to leverage emotions to your advantage, looking at how can you recognize some early signs of burnout. I'm going to give you 3 ideas. So if nothing else, you can walk away with 3 things to add to what I call a well-being toolkit. So these are exercises that you can start doing, like as soon as this is over, you can start implementing them in your life. And then we'll make sure there's some time for Q&A. And again, ask questions in the chat as we go if anything's not clear. So first, let's start by talking about emotions. Emotions can really be a superpower. And that's how I love to think about emotions or being emotional, which sometimes I think has a stigma attached to it, but really emotions are data. They tell us so many valuable things about our state and it's information. And what I talk here about is emotional agility. There's some steps towards being emotionally agile and what that means. So the first step here is we're going to talk about how to identify your emotions. This is attaching language, vocabulary to understand what is it that you're feeling? What kind of words could we put on that? Once you're able to do that, you're able to communicate it to yourself, to others around you, what it is that you're experiencing. By doing that, there's great research around how naming your emotion actually reduces the intensity of that experience. So you're kind of reclaiming some of that power. So it's not being a victim of your emotions, but actually managing it. And then the final part, which I think is the most empowering, is that you can start to shift your energy. Once you understand it, name it, communicate it, you can decide, is this serving you or do you want to shift? And that's where those tools will come in that I talked about. So do any of you recognize these characters, where they're from? If you do, put it in the chat. Where are these from? Yeah, I know it's my favorite too. I use this crew a lot when I talk about emotions. Yeah, it's from Inside Out. Perfect, Ethan. So Inside Out, if you haven't seen it, I sometimes joke that this is like homework, like go and watch Inside Out as a primer on starting to identify emotions and who they are. So in this movie, each of these characters represents, or they stand for, an emotion. And that's the kind of the start of what I'm talking about when I say recognizing emotions, being able to see that, there's in the middle with the blue hair, that's joy. Or the green character, that's disgust. But I want to give to you even a more rich vocabulary of how to start to label and identify your emotions. So one tool that you can use, it's called the mood meter. And I don't know on your screens how this particular one, the words are pretty tiny, but if you go to mood meter, just Google mood meter, or the one where this is from ops.org. But there's lots of versions of this online. And this is a way to start to figure out for yourself, build that self-awareness of, where do you sit? So the first step in using this chart is to start on the bottom on the pleasantness, the x-axis, if you're a math person, and think about, on a scale of 1 to 10, how pleasant are you feeling right now? So that's all I'll ask you for right now. I'm not going to ask you to share if you don't want, but think for yourself today, in this moment, scale of 1 to 10, about how pleasant are you? Once you have that, next, look at the y-axis, your energy level. On a scale of 1 to 10, about how much energy do you have? And you think of that number. And there's no right or wrong answer. There's all kinds of reasons why you might be at an energy 1 today, and that is okay. Or a 10 energy, and that's okay. But to think of that number. And then, if it was not obvious, you go and you find, if I was a 1, I'll do the easiest one. A 1 pleasantness and a 1 energy, that would put you at despair. You start to think about, okay, does that resonate? When you hear that for yourself, is that how I'm feeling? And if not, you can start to explore the words around it. This is all around attaching language to our emotional state. If you have and actually I think any phone, I used to say for an iPhone, it was on iOS, but there's an app called How We Feel, and I will put it in the chat because I love it that much. But How We Feel is the app. And if you go and you download that, it not only has the words attached, but also descriptions of what that looks like in action. And so you can start to understand for yourself, physically, what does it feel like when I feel secure or disappointed or blissful? How does that feel inside of me? What are the thoughts that I associate with that? So this is a really useful tool. And you can start to bring that language into your conversations with your teams as well, or even just for yourself, for your self-awareness. So say for myself right now, I would say pleasantness, I'm at about an 8. I find when I do these talks, it's energizing for me. So I'm going to give that an 8 as well. And that would put me at enthusiastic. Yeah, I think that resonates. So if you're comfortable sharing, I'd love to hear, where are you sitting today? This can also be a really useful tool for checking in with your teams, for people to start to understand, where is everyone sitting? So at ease today. Awesome. Thank you for sharing, Sophie. One thing I will say about the mood meter too, and please continue to put in the chat, where are you at? I don't know if it resonates with any of you, but the way I was brought up was the yellow quadrant in particular was seen as like the good place to be. And if you were in the blue side or the red side, that was like not good. That was a bad place. And like, how quickly can we get you out of that to start to shift? And I really want to emphasize that if that's a message that you receive too, that it's bad to be in any one of these places, to really try and interrupt that and instead to go back to thinking about emotions as data, that it's important to experience the full range of human emotion. But then what I talked about earlier with emotional agility, you need to decide, once you've experienced that and identified it, to decide, is it serving you? Or is it time to shift? Playfully today, Alex. I love that. Playfulness is like a whole other topic that I love speaking about and exploring. I think being playful has really great connections to being creative or problem solving and stuff. All of the emotions have unique values and purpose. So thank you for sharing that. I do want to talk quickly about burnout because I know it was promised in this talk that we would talk around burnout and how to understand. And for me, I know when I repeatedly go into that mood chart, and find myself identifying that I'm experiencing more of those low energy, low pleasant emotions day after day, for me, that's an early sign that I'm on a path towards burnout. It's different for everyone though. Burnout, the International Center for Disease actually defines it in there in the ICD-11. So defined as a syndrome resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. So I want you to really hang on to those words around management, because that's what this session is all about. It's around managing that stress. Not saying I wish I could remove your workplace stresses, but we can't necessarily remove the stress. But you do have control over certain other aspects of your work. And so that's how we start to recognize and avoid burnout, is by taking control of what you can manage. So if you look up signs of burnout, there's a whole list, again, from World Health Organization, of how to identify signs. So it can include things like exhaustion, being cynical, having reduced professional efficacy. But there's other signs as well. So I'd love to hear, what do you experience? If you think about times in your life where you've started to feel burnt out, or maybe have burnt out, what are those signals? I see there's a question in the chat here around what should I do if I feel guilty for taking time off? I'm actually going to talk specifically about that when one of the tools I'm going to talk about is breaks and time off. So I will come back to that around how to manage emotions we have around stepping away. But burnout is very real. And so even if these things don't resonate for you and you think, well, no, my burnout looks different, that's okay. I think the important part is recognizing for yourself when it's too much, when you're not managing. I grabbed this photo because I like to kind of as a way of looking at what it might look like on the outside. This is the 4 stages of stress from The Office. But thinking for yourself, what are your signals that your stress is becoming unmanageable? Is it, that you're catching yourself on your phone in bed at 2 a.m. responding to emails, or do you give up your hobbies and routines in favor of work? Sophie say, looking like this every day at work. I feel you. I've had jobs like that for sure. At a certain point, I think part of taking back some of that agency and autonomy over, what you can control is if you decide, hey, this is the environment I've stepped into. Maybe you're in a toxic workplace. Maybe you're in a space where it feels impossible to manage. Then deciding, is this actually where you're going to feel joy and purpose, being in whatever work environment you're in. But some of this is manageable, and hopefully we can get you out of some of this overwhelm. So getting in touch with what it looks like for you. So that brings us to the well-being toolkit. When I talk about the well-being toolkit, I put in some of the things that I think about for myself. And at different points in my life, I have drawn on each of these in different amounts. And I really do imagine it like I have this bag or this toolkit where I can pull the right tool for that moment for what's serving me. And this is why I think it's so important to have variety, because at some points, some of them are more effective than others, or some of them are more feasible than others. So for me, things like exercise, medication sometimes, volunteering has been huge for me as a way to step outside of myself. And there is great research. Each person's well-being toolkit is different. But if you don't have many tools in your toolkit, if you say, well, I have journaling, but then you don't think of anything else, that's where I would love to start to add in some more ideas, just so that you have more options. So the 3 things I'm going to share with you today are options. If one of them works for you, I am so happy. That would be the best, is if you can pull away even one thing that you could add in, that would be so good. But if none of these are quite right, if nothing else, I would love for you to start thinking about how many more tools can you add to your toolkit to build resiliency, help you manage. I'm just looking at the chat for a minute. So I think, this idea, all of our jobs require too much. Some of this I think is an effect of COVID. And companies are still figuring out companies and teams, how to manage that. During COVID, we had sort of a hypervigilance, hyperconnectivity, and it is really hard to create effective boundaries. I am still working on this. I think I worked remotely pre-COVID, and I continue to work remotely, but something has fundamentally shifted where I have had to be even more intentional about managing my mental health right now. And maybe that resonates for you as well, that whether you're in person or remote, it just feels like we are all trying to do more with less and things. This is a tough time, but all the more reason to build in time to think about, well, how can we make sure it's sustainable? Because we're not serving anyone if we burn out for not coping. Yeah, I agree, Sophie. Working remotely means working for two positions most of the time. It can feel that way. It can be that way. It's really challenging. So let's get into some of the tools and see how it works for you. So these are the three that I'm going to talk about. One is around breaks, and I see already that there's sometimes mixed feelings around whether that's possible. How are people going to receive that? So I want to talk about that. Next, I want to talk about digital boundaries, creating space with how we use technology. Hopefully that will help with sleep hygiene, which I see in the chat as well. And then finally, gratitude reframing. So 3 ideas to get you started. So let's talk about breaks first. What I specifically want to talk about is right-sized breaks, which means I know it's not feasible for necessarily to say, hey, you know what, you should go on vacation tomorrow. It may not be possible, but we can take breaks every day in small amounts all the way up to big. So first, thinking about a micro break. But what I mean by this is, say within the next hour, if you start to notice for yourself, checking in that your emotions are feeling unmanageable or that you're feeling overwhelmed, what could you do now as a 30-second, a 3-minute quick reset? I am going to specifically teach you one that you can use in a moment, but thinking about those micro breaks, what can you do now? I find for myself something I do, like I said, I work from home, I work in this room, something as simple as leaving this room and shutting the door so that I don't see this room, and going and getting a drink of water, stepping outside to breathe fresh air for a minute. Even that, as small as it is, can have a boost on my mental health and how I'm feeling about the day and its stresses. So micro breaks, what can you do now? There's also strong research around how our body naturally works in these energy cycles. And if you're curious about it, you can Google this 90-minute energy cycle. But really what the research shows us is that after 90 minutes, our bodies need to break. Ideally, 20 minutes is a good amount to break. I would say any break after 90 minutes is good. So for me, what that means is if I'm taking 30-minute calls, I won't take more than 3 in a row without blocking in my calendar a break because of that 90-minute cycle. And even just my brain is full. And so I try and manage my calendar as a way of managing that 90-minute cycle. But thinking for yourself, how often are you trying to do marathon sessions 5 hours at a time without stepping away? Are you even effective at that point? So as much as possible, acknowledging it may not always be feasible, but thinking about every 90 minutes, do you stand up? Do you take a breath? So what that looks like. Of thinking about managing your energy. Like I said, owning your calendar. For me, that means I do block time in my calendar. I had a colleague at my former job where she was the master of calendaring, and every Friday would set aside time to look at the upcoming week and make sure that her time, she was owning the time of when she was taking lunches, when she would make herself available. But thinking for yourself, what would be most effective? Rather than saying yes to everything, but okay, do I accept networking chats with people only say on Fridays? Or do you set aside time at the beginning or end of the day to get caught up on messages, things like that? But really intentionally thinking about how are you structuring your time? It is possible, and each person's solution will look different, but some ideas there. And finally, at that macro level, taking time away. This now is talking about the energy of vacation and that kind of recharge. I know lots of times we have guilt around doing this. And I think as much as possible, doing a mental reframe around actually, this is what is needed to ultimately be a higher performer. I was at a conference last week and it was a high performance athlete who was speaking about this energy. And he was comparing the energy of corporate life to energy as an athlete. And when you're competing in sport, probably most of you know, you can't just train and train and train and never rest. You actually won't perform at your best. You need to build in rest to actually have it's an overshoot in performance, that when they take time to rest and relax, that's when the magic happens. It's when they sleep, when they take time off, then they're able to come back even higher performance. And think about that for yourself too. If you are just grinding, hustling day after day after day, you are not going to be the most effective performer. So I am sure all of you would say to your colleagues and friends, you should take time off, you should take a vacation. And maybe if you can repeat that to yourself and think of it as actually that you are ultimately doing it, taking this holiday in service of others as well, not just yourself. It's not selfish. It helps everyone. Hopefully, maybe that might help a little bit. So again, if you have questions about any of this, please just put it in the chat. Alex, I love that. I'm taking time off tomorrow. Awesome. This is good. Time off is important. So I think, and I think you're right, Sophie, we are our harshest critics. And I sometimes think of that too, of the things I say to myself. Is it what I would say to my partner? Is it what I would say to my closest work friend? By and large, the harshest messages I send to myself, I would never in a million years say to someone else. So why do we say it to ourselves? Or why do we say, no, just keep pushing? No, we deserve better and to be kind to ourselves. So I am going to ask you to just be playful for just a minute and to try this one thing with me. I said I would teach you a small micro break. And so that's what we're going to do in this moment. Is I'm going to teach you something this is called box breathing. And you can do this in as short as 30 seconds or take a few minutes. But box breathing is a really effective tool to refocus and ground yourself. And if any of you have done yoga before or done any breath work or anything like that, you may have had some exposure to intentional breathing and what that looks like. This is also something that I have learned. It's used by public speakers, politicians. The Navy SEALs use box breathing as a way to ground themselves and refocus before going into extreme, high pressure, dangerous, potentially situations. And so this is an effective tool, hopefully for all of us with our computer lives and things like that, we can take a minute to do this. What it is controlling our breathing for a set period of time. We're going to do it for less than a minute. Calms our nervous system and it brings us back into the moment. And all we're going to do is inhale to a count of 4, hold it for a count of 4, and then exhale to a count of 4 and hold it for a count of 4. I'm going to do it with you. Selfishly, I like it as well. I love leading people in it because I like doing it. So what I'm going to ask you to do is make sure that you're in a comfortable position. For most folks, I find sitting is just great, but if you would rather stand, that's cool too. Your feet just flat on the floor and put your hands on your lap, and you can choose to either have your eyes open or eyes shut, whatever is the most comfortable for you. You're just gonna really make sure that you are comfortable, as calm as you can be. We're gonna inhale through our nose, 2, 3, 4, and hold that, 2, 3, 4, and exhale, 2, 3, 4, and hold it, 2, 3, 4, and again, inhaling and really feel your lungs filling and holding it, and exhaling and hold. I want you to keep going on your own time. And when you inhale, we inhale through our nose, really feeling our lungs fill. And on the exhale, the best way to really empty that air out is exhale through your mouth. Really feel that you're getting fresh, clean oxygen in and blowing that all out. And I just want you to do a few cycles of that on your own. And when you're ready, if your eyes were shut, you would reopen them. If your eyes are open, just come back into this space. And I want you to take a moment to reflect on how are you feeling? Is there a word that you're feeling? I see it feels amazing, feels better. This is something that is so quick to do. It is sometimes hard to remember when we are in some kind of a crisis situation or we're going into a difficult conversation. It can be tough to remember to do this, which is why I would encourage you to practice it when you're not that stressed. Ideally, the more we practice something, the more it becomes a habit. and so that we can draw on it when things are really stressful and really difficult. That was one of the hardest lessons I had to learn in therapy, was that I needed to practice this stuff even when I felt good. Because when I felt good, like the last thing I wanted to do was think about doing my exercises for feeling mentally well. But that's when it's actually most important. It helps us to feel like it's automatic and we can turn to it. So yeah, I would encourage you to experiment with doing this more regularly if you don't already. It takes next to no time, like less time than going to get a coffee. You know, if you're in a virtual world like me, it's like typing in the chat, be right back, 1 minute, and doing something like this. If you like apps, the app Headspace or the app Balance are both really helpful for guided breathing exercises. So I would encourage you, if you want, explore those. They're ones that I have turned to at different points in my life as helpful tools. So one idea for a quick micro break. Next, I want to talk about digital boundaries. This is so important. This is the one that I struggle with the most. So I will share with you what I am working on, and it's not always perfect, but yeah, sure. I'll put the apps in the chat too before I get into this. So the ones I mentioned just now were Headspace and Balance. I would have to check. Both of those I think have at least some degree of free trial. So I would recommend checking those out. I'm not endorsed to promote those in any way. They're just ones that I personally have liked. So check those out. Okay, so digital boundaries. This is around how, when, how, with who do we use technology? And I think this is relevant no matter your industry, no matter where in the world you live. We are just living in this hyper-connected world right now. I think this really impacts, like, especially our Gen Z employees, or Gen Alpha employees coming into the workforce. They've grown up always with tech. It is really hard to disconnect and quiet the mind and feel like you can reclaim some space. It's like everyone is everywhere. It's really challenging. There's research from Gloria Mark that says when we are interrupted, say if you're doing a report or you're in some kind of flow of doing a task, when we're interrupted, it can take 23 minutes or more. And like, this is after doing all this study on hundreds of people, it took at least 23 minutes on average to refocus and get back into that groove. So if you can imagine, if you have Slack notifications going and your phone is on and you're accepting calls and the email is open and you're checking that and constantly having those inputs, it's going to be pretty hard to keep your uninterrupted flow because the notifications are not going to go away. So this is again around empowering yourself to take control and think about what is within your control that you can manage. So some ideas for this is to think about what platforms are you going to have open? Where will you make yourself available? So that's one part of it. But then thinking too about when are you going to communicate? Every platform, all the time, you're available? Or is there a way that you could maybe manage that and say, hey, from 7 to 8 a.m., I am going to check my emails. I will turn my Slack onto Do Not Disturb, and I will just focus on getting that done first. That's what I mean when I talk about timing and where you are. Again, this is going to be unique for each of us, depending on what your context is. But thinking about what that looks like. Thinking about people I know some people who have like a list of trusted folks who can break through the barriers. You know, maybe if you are fortunate to have, an assistant helping you, that person is the one person who can bother you at any point. But if it's, everyone can reach me on every platform all the time, that's a lack of boundaries. So thinking about who are those people that you want to trust in different spaces. So who will reach you at what times, when, and when do you have that sacred space of uninterrupted tech-free time? There should be tech-free time every day. It doesn't matter what time, really, but there needs to be a point where you can unplug. It's really, really important. Once you figure that out for yourself, thinking about how are you going to communicate that? Because you can't control what other people do. Other people may still try and reach you, but at least you can communicate to them proactively, communicate to your team, to your manager, your customers. Hey, I'm going to be unavailable for the next 45 minutes. going for a walk, whatever it is that you're doing, but thinking about how are you communicating. So I want you to think about that for yourself as, part of that action planning. What are your digital boundaries? When are you making sure that you create those blocks so you have time to reset, time for what's important to you, in addition to making sure that you do the best possible work? I'd love to hear if any of you have ideas as well around other ways that you have digital boundaries and suggestions for that. Please put them in the chat, because I feel like the more ideas we have on this, the better. It is challenging to manage. For me, I found turning notifications off, and my phone is pretty much always on silent, but that's been helpful for me to manage those inputs. Any other ideas though around managing digital boundaries? Please share them. This is a tricky one for sure, but very important. The last one I want to talk about, and then I'll make sure we have some time for Q&A, is talking about gratitude. So why is gratitude so important? This is just around expressing thankfulness. This is a very small shift, but what does the science say around why gratitude is so powerful for our well-being? Again, lots of studies on this. I can send them to you if you're curious, but science has shown that by people who have a regular gratitude practice have lower levels of physical stress, things like a lower heart rate or reduced incidence of cardiac disease. So physiologically healthier. It's also linked to increased happiness and optimism. My partner sent me an article yesterday saying that actually hopefulness and gratitude have been strongly linked to employee well-being, and that if we can practice more hopefulness, that there's really good outcomes. So that, again, more science is saying this is so important. Gratitude improves our relationships, whether it's relationships with coworkers, with friends, with family. And one really good study showed that when managers express gratitude for the people on their team, that it actually has a statistically significant increase on the motivation of those employees. So thinking about the power, we already know that bosses have a lot of power over our well-being, but also this power for good, in that a grateful manager really will help the team. So huge benefits to thinking about how do we bring gratitude into our day. And I heard this last week and I loved it, because I thought, there's some days where it feels really hard to be grateful, where it feels like the things coming at us is just trash. And the phrase that this person used was to think about, what are the gifts in garbage bags? What can we take away? So this idea that when we see garbage bags, that's trash. We don't want that. But what are the gifts inside of that? What can we take away to ultimately be grateful for? And so, things like the example that she shared was her cell phone was stolen. It's a garbage bag moment. So right away, feeling negative, having that negative emotional response. But then in the process of trying to get it back, encountered kindness of strangers, the taxi driver who immediately rushed her to go and get support, and then the salespeople who were helping with getting a cheap phone to get her set up, and all these people coming in to help, and suddenly seeing the gift of human connection and the kindness of strangers. And when you put your focus there, whatever you put your focus on is what's going to get our attention and our energetic attention. And so by doing that, that's a way, again, of taking control. You can choose to focus on the trash. You could focus on the stolen cell phone. You could focus on the gifts. And in the end, she actually was able to find her stolen phone. So amazing. But thinking about that, of what are you putting your focus on? Because that's where your energy will follow. And so maybe that's one way. There's lots of things you can read about gratitude journaling, power of writing it down can increase the positive impact of gratitude up to 10 times more. So writing gratitude journaling, very real benefits, even more than just thinking about it. If you write it down, up to 10 times more impact. But if nothing else, throughout your day, when these annoying things happen, the garbage bags, I want you to think about gifts in garbage bags. What can you reframe to be grateful for in this moment? I love seeing this daily gratitude practice. Thank you for sharing that, Sophie. It's true. We have so much to be grateful for, and yet it's easy to get sucked into complaining or focusing on the negative, especially when we're stressed out. especially when we're in a difficult workplace environment, and really making sure that we are owning our ability to express our gratitude, to feel blessed. Even when things are challenging, there's always good to take away. So brings us to this action plan. We don't have time today, unfortunately, to go through. I would love to hear more. If you want, please find me on LinkedIn or send me a message anytime if you have questions or if you're willing to share, because I think this is really where you can create so much positive change. And I love getting ideas from what folks are putting into an action plan. But what I would encourage you to think about for today, I've shared with you a few strategies around breaks, digital boundaries, gratitude, ideas for your toolkit, but to think about what's one thing that you can start today, right now, thinking about in the immediate short term, one thing to take away. What's one thing that maybe you want to stop, something that's no longer serving you? Maybe you want to stop eating lunch in front of your computer and instead take 10 minutes and go eat it somewhere else. Maybe you want to stop having notifications come in and strategically turn off certain apps. Whatever it is, one thing to start, one thing to stop. I want you to think about one way to help someone else. Maybe if you look outside of yourself and see someone who maybe could benefit from your help. Is there something that you could teach someone on your team? Is there someone in your life who would benefit from learning about, very broadly, this is all part of emotional intelligence. How could you help them? And then to have one longer term goal. For me, that longer term goal is vacation in future, and I can plan towards that of like, how am I going to work towards building in, semi-regular vacations, and what could that look like? How could I make the most of that time? How will I manage my time on vacation? But think about one longer term goal. So those are the parts of the action plan that I'd love for you to think about. Yeah. So I see in the chat here, someone's saying one thing that worked was never taking anything personally. It's so true. There's an acronym, QTIP, stands for quit taking it personally. Think of Q-tip, and it's so key for that reframe. Like if someone cuts you off in traffic, you can invent a whole story about how they're such a jerk and it's so terrible, and they're out to get you, and it's really rough. If you reframe, quit taking it personally, and instead think about, wow, that person may be having a really tough day. This is not about me and how I'm driving. Let it slide off. Try and imagine the best possible scenario rather than the worst. You can go a long way for your own emotions. You're actually doing a favor to yourself by doing that. So thank you for sharing that, Sophie. It's so true. That's one thing to stop. Stop taking it personally if you are, and start that reframe. So if this is the kind of stuff that you enjoy learning about, enjoy thinking about, here's a few ideas for ways to continue your learning. There's some really wonderful books on emotional intelligence that I enjoy reading. One of my favorite podcasts is called Hidden Brain. It just talks about human behavior and how we work and think the way we do. But there's some really, really great nuggets out of that. This Coursera course, The Science of Wellbeing by Dr. Laurie Santos, I feel like I have recommended it to everyone in my life over the past few months, but you can take it on Coursera for free. And she also has a podcast, but she really gets into the science of happiness and how to be more happy. And I noticed I had improvements in my happiness from taking this course. And so I would encourage you to check it out. It doesn't hurt. If nothing else, it's like a small something to add, and hopefully benefits you. So please check that out. I am going to pause there and just say thank you for giving your time in your stressful days to listen to this and come and play along and be open to these ideas. Please, I said, reach out to me. That's my email address. You can see my website is bursty.ca, and so you can check it out and the kinds of things that I like learning about and doing. But at this point, I'm going to open it up. If there's questions, I will take questions and go from there. Thank you all for coming. And if any of you want these slides or anything, I'm happy to share them as well. Send me an email, find me on LinkedIn. Happy to send the slides out. So if there's any questions, I am here. Alex, that's a huge compliment. Thank you. Same. Awesome. I'm glad it was helpful. Thank you. And I know for myself, I get webinar fatigue doing so much online. So I know what it takes to carve out the space to come to these things. So thank you for giving your energy and coming. I do appreciate it. And again, thank you to Eventcombo for hosting, for giving us this platform, for creating the space for these kinds of conversations. That really it means a lot. Tips for event planners when in crisis. That's a good question. So being candid, I've only planned a handful of events in my life. And so I'm not an event expert. So I would love, if you're willing, Alex, I don't know. I don't even know if you can unmute yourself on this, but if you could, that would be cool. But if not, maybe could you type in the chat a description of like an example of a crisis that you may encounter, even just at a high level? Like, is it the sort of thing where it's too many things happening all at once, or like something needs to be done in the next 8 minutes, or like what might be an event planner crisis that you would encounter? Yeah, do find me on LinkedIn for sure. What I will say is sort of as a start to a response, just around handling crisis. So one of the things that I had said earlier that I would just underscore in this moment is the more you practice these things when things are going well, the more likely it is that you will turn to them in a time of crisis. So for example, the box breathing. If you have practiced that, when you find yourself in crisis, say the client or customer that you're planning this event for is yelling at you because the vendors haven't shown up or things weren't delivered or whatever, managing your emotions before you get into that conversation by taking a moment to breathe, more likely to have a successful outcome. And so I think that's one thing I would encourage is practice early. I think the other strategy that I would give specifically for event planners, where I know you're working with a lot of stakeholders, you're working with not just your team, but you've got all these other people with potentially competing ideas or interests and things. I think the most emotionally intelligent people I've worked with have had an ability to look at problems as something that you're tackling together. So rather than me versus you, instead we're looking at, okay, we are facing this problem over here and we're side by side and we're going to tackle it together. So I think entering into those conversations can sometimes be really difficult, but getting to the root of what is it that they want or need to get out of this experience, what is their goal, and then working together towards that. I think having that mindset shift. So it's both a combination of managing your stress, but then also a mindset shift. So that's a start. So there's a couple other questions here. How do we handle workplace stress? Times feeling like quitting. So I get that. I think all of us feel like that at times. I think as a quick response to that question around handling workplace stress, I'd say it can be very helpful to talk about it, actually, if you aren't already. And I don't mean in a complaining sort of a way, but I do mean that when we try and tackle this workplace stress on our own, I think sometimes it perpetuates this idea that we're the only ones struggling, when actually we could benefit from other people's strategies or suggestions of how are they managing, and it can make us feel less alone. It can be a very lonely experience to be feeling this kind of stress. So what I might say for that question there is to think about, who might be 1, 2, 3 people in your workplace that you could trust. I would say like is manager someone you could trust, or colleagues, and say, hey, I'm experiencing really high amounts of stress and I'm struggling. Do you have any suggestions? Do you have any ideas? And really inviting other people to feel like they're someone trusted. And if you've been on the receiving end of that, like that can actually feel really good for someone to trust you with that and to be vulnerable. You may find they have some good suggestions. I think the other thing too is, if you do feel like it's becoming completely untenable, to not be afraid to explore what does your workplace offer for mental health supports. Is there counseling services where you can get more regular support, and to really not be afraid to use those benefits that are available to you. Because if you're feeling like quitting day after day, it's definitely not sustainable. So some things to think about. Question here, what are some respectful ways to approach a colleague if I notice they might be struggling with their mental health? That's a great question. I'll give my perspective, and if others too, I'd love to hear what some of you have done, as ways to approach that. I have found time and again the most helpful, respectful ways is to just have a conversation. I think sometimes there's a fear that by asking someone if they are struggling, that it will create a problem or they'll be self-conscious. And I think, no, this can be as simple as asking someone, how are they doing really? Or finding ways, I'm gonna find it after this. I had a whole list of like questions that you could ask to open up a conversation. I think because how are you is like the tip of the iceberg, but really getting into asking someone, What are some ways that they're managing stress? And sometimes some of it comes from being vulnerable first. That's been helpful for me. If I think someone is struggling, if I can get them into a conversation, hey, do you want to go for a walk, or do you want to have lunch, whatever. And when I'm able to say, you know what, this time at work, like the last few months here have just been super overwhelming. How are you doing with it? How are you feeling? And I've struggled, or I've noticed, and I find sometimes that can be helpful. It's just creating the space. That is a respectful way. It shows care and concern, but talking to them directly, I think is what I would recommend. Communicating with my team about mental wellness. See them overworking a lot. Yeah. Well, so that's a good question, Sophie, around asking, how to communicate ideas to your team. There's a lot of ways that I have found different teams have tackled it. There was one team that I worked with, and they had a weekly meeting, like a weekly scrum meeting at the start of every week. And they started incorporating into it a 3-minute mental wellness moment to share a resource or an exercise or a tool, a suggestion to help get people through the week. And they rotated who would be responsible for doing that. So hey, this week it's Sophie's take on hey, I found this cool podcast or this thing that will help for mental wellness. And it was sort of a sneaky way to educate people and give them some ideas, again, building up that toolkit through an existing meeting. Another thing you can do is, if you're participating in things for mental wellness, just start communicating that. Doing things like communicating those digital boundaries, communicating your vacation time, setting that example, and being open about it. That can help set by example as well. It's time for one more question. How do I bounce back from a particularly stressful event without carrying that stress into the next project? Thanks, Avery. That's a really good question. I think with that one, I would say, if it's not feasible to actually take time off, sometimes for me, that's what I need is, a day or two vacation or more after a particularly stressful project. But I think one thing that I have found helpful after a particularly stressful event is to focus on the learnings and the takeaways and actually write them down to implement of it. Again, it feels like you're taking ownership and you're taking back some of that control and power by what are you going to do differently? So was it particularly stressful because you worked overtime and you were doing all these calls with, people was at 6 a.m. because of time zone difference maybe, and how will you do things differently? And journaling and reflecting, that power of writing can be really helpful, and trying to really think proactively around how will you do things differently? What have you learned that you can bring forward into the next project? And really bolstering your mental well-being right from the start. So maybe ramping up your use of some of the tools in your toolkit, if it's exercise for you or journaling, relaxing, whatever that is, that can be really helpful to do a little bit extra, just in anticipation of you need some of that recuperation. I said, are we good to still keep the platform open? Can I answer one more question? Is that okay? I know we're 1 minute over. If any of you have to drop, that's totally fine too. I'm going to answer it. And just, if we have to wrap it up, no worries. Thank you again for sticking around. So this last question here, is it possible to detect signs of continuously deteriorating mental health in someone, particularly when they are habitual to hiding their pain? Yeah, so this is hard. A lot of people struggle in silence or hide how much they're struggling. There are questionnaires, like medical questionnaires that you can look up for yourself of am I struggling with anxiety? Am I struggling with depression? And it's a bit of a pulse check, not a diagnosis, but that check on, am I okay? Are they okay? And depending on who you're talking about in your life, that may or may not be appropriate to say, hey, there's this resource just to do a check-in. And here it is. And so that is a tool available. But I think things that I watch for when someone is struggling and not talking about it, if they're not expressing it, I watch for things like, are they still participating in activities like they used to? Are there changes in how they're appearing outwardly, whether it's with, their anything around their appearance, if it's that there's changes there, is sleep impacted or timing impacted? But it can be really hard. And I think that's why I put the emphasis on starting to make it more normalized in your teams to talk about emotions and building that self-awareness, because it does lower the chances that we end up suffering and struggling alone or in pain. So again, using those emotion words, sharing that resource with your teams can be helpful as a way of hey, let's start to talk about this and make it more normal in the workplace. It goes a long way. I know we're a few minutes over. Again, thank you so much for joining for this webinar. You know where to find me. Love to hear from each of you and continue the conversation. Again, thank you, Syed and team, for hosting this. And I hope you all have the most well week that you can. And yeah, look forward to connecting. Thank you.